From an undisclosable location, for reasons of security as well as insecurity, this is Coast to Coast AM. I am John B. Wells. Pleasure to be in with you tonight. And I have to tell you, now I know how Secretariat felt. This is the night of 9/11. It's 9/12 on the East Coast. It's 9/12 in the Central Time Zone. Got an hour to go, Mountain. 2 hours to go in L.A., California, West Coast. And I got to tell you, I was just a little bit tweaky about tonight's show, and I'll tell you why. You probably know, but I'll tell you anyway. This has been one of those days. It's the 10th anniversary of the 9/11 attack in New York City. This is the tail end of it. And while I don't like to demonstrate any weakness to the audience, I want to tell you that I think I felt more stress about this show than any other, simply because it is so emotionally charged for everybody. It's absolutely draining. Now, I'm going to be all over the place here for a little bit, but I hope you'll bear with me, because I believe all of these roads lead to Rome, so to speak. I think about my father every September. He passed away 10 years ago, before his birthday on the 10th. He'd only been gone a little over a couple of months, and I was thinking about him on his birthday, and then the next day this happened. And to me, it is poignant personally that his father, my grandfather, predicted, I've told this story before, but I'll tell it again for anybody who didn't hear it. My grandfather predicted a war with Japan 10 years before it happened, so I asked my father what he predicted. He was a Pearl Harbor veteran. Attacked at Pearl Harbor on the battleship his father helped build. I said, "What do you predict, Dad?" He said, "The thing about the next one is you won't know who you're fighting." And that stayed with me ever since. I got an email from a lovely part of California, Pasadena. I won't tell you who it is, just for that person's privacy, and they were concerned that this program would turn into some, to use this person's language. This would turn into some sort of a crazy truther show, and those people, the victims of 9/11, that would be a black mark on them and a black mark for us, and just not a good thing. But I have to tell you that, as emotional as it is, sadness, anger, more than anything else, there's fear. Fear. Where is all this fear coming from? Well, it can't be the fear of death. That's coming for all of us, and we're all maintaining our sanity, for the most part, with that waiting for us. So what can it be? I think it's the worst fear of all. I think it's the fear of betrayal by those we trust. And so, should we soft pedal a 9/11 show? Or should we just tell it like it is? Like it is. One of the reasons that this show is dear to me, and why it is such a privilege and an honor for me to sit with you tonight, is that this show has never been known for being politically correct. I don't think there's anybody here that recognizes political correctness as some sort of an American characteristic until recently. So if you'll indulge me, I will just eulogize the murder victims of 9/11 to this extent. I don't think they want us to feel fear and sadness necessarily, solely. I think they want us to be absolutely determined to find out who did this. And when we do, no matter how long it takes, or who it is, who it turns out to be, maybe then we can build another wall, like the one for the fallen vets. But this time, with a list of the names of the perpetrators, so that their names may be remembered in shame for generations. Those people were worth more than to have to jump 100 stories, or be incinerated in jet fuel. They were worth more than to have some self-righteous backside-covering prag spew on about what a tragedy it was, and yet no one has even found out who short-sold the airline stocks and who still have millions waiting to be collected. They were worth more than to have this is my opinion, strictly, as far as this program is concerned, a billionaire mayor keep a clergyman from praying for their souls. They were worth more than that. And yet I'll tell you, in death, they were worth something absolutely precious. And this is what it is, in my opinion. They galvanized the hearts of millions unto the truth that all men are brothers. And that's why we shed tears for people we don't know. So, out of the cage it comes. For the first hour, Mr. Craig Hulet. He's not happy. This is a learned man. And for the remainder of the program, Russ Baker. Now, these are learned, studied people. I've had a few brushes with certain elements of the services, but only brushes. Craig Hulet, full immersion. And we'll hear from him shortly. Russ Baker, a journalist who is, I've never spoken with him before, but both of these men have been guests of the program, and they're good, and they do their research. And that's why we keep having them back. Russ Baker, not afraid to go out on the clothesline. When I spoke to him today, he didn't really know what I meant. And I said, well, just out there, you're just hanging like between two buildings on the clothesline, full exposure. And we said, oh, I get it. I knew I liked him at once. So that's what we're going to do. Tonight, we're going to talk about some unanswered questions with 9/11, because that's what everybody wants to know. Because I have to tell you, ladies and gentlemen, ball's in our court. Politicians aren't doing it. There's something strange afoot. So let's, if you'll just indulge me one bit more, let's call this a little caravan to midnight. If Simon Cowell can borrow Road to Xanadu for his book about Orson Welles, then I can borrow Caravan to Midnight from Robin Trower. That's really more my deal. The Caravan to Midnight. What, the midnight, the doomsday clock like the atomic scientists have? No, not necessarily. Midnight's a strange thing. Is it the end? Is it the beginning? Is it neither? Or is it both? Come along on a little caravan ride. Let's head toward midnight together. See what it really is. Coming up, Craig Hulet on Coast to Coast AM. Stand by. It's always a pleasure to hear Craig Hulet on the program, and it's a special treat for me to be able to actually talk to him. Let me tell you, his bona fides are unbelievable. He served in Vietnam, 69 to 70, 101st Airborne, Sea Troop, graduated third from the third in his class at the Aberdeen Proving Grounds Ordnance School. He is an ongoing consultant in the areas of geopolitical, business, security issues, terrorism, and military affairs. Craig, how are you? It's good talking to you again.
Good evening.
You don't seem happy. Give us your thoughts and just let it all hang out.
Well, I feel pretty much the same way I felt from the very beginning with 9/11. I don't know if I ever mentioned this when you and I have talked about these subjects, but I was the first person called after George Bush's terrorism speech on the Jim Bohannon show on the 20th of September. And I listened to the speech, and then Jim Bohannon put me on live in Washington, D.C. as the first response to his speech. And I immediately created extremely bad feelings towards me, including Mr. Bohannon, I'm afraid, because I said it was absurd that we were being told Al-Qaeda existed the way we were told it existed, and that bin Laden perpetrated 9/11. I knew none of this was true. And I said so. And I stated very clearly then that there was nation-state involvement. There was no question there was nation-state involvement, because the intelligence that was used and displayed during 9/11, during that day, the things that came out from CIA codes, State Department, Secret Service, there were calls made to the White House that they knew where Bush was, where Air Force One was. There were just too much knowledge out there by the perpetrators. It could not have been bin Laden. It had to be nation-state intelligence. I couldn't have pinned it on Saudi Arabia at the time, but later on it became clear that there's only one nation-state that could have, would have done it, backed it, financed it, could have pulled it off, and at the same time directed our efforts as a country, as a nation-state, and yes, Israel as well, at Iraq, the known enemy of Saudi Arabia and Israel. And I think Afghanistan was the most absurd thing this country has ever said about doing. 10 years into it, it's now proven to be even more absurd. And now that our new president, 10 years into this, our new president assassinates the one man, the one intelligence source that was listed as the most important intelligence source, human intelligence, on planet Earth at this time. And what does he do? Shoots him in the head. He issues a kill order. Not a take, not a capture, not to be debriefed, not to be, I don't care, tortured at Guantanamo Bay. They killed him because they didn't want him to say, I didn't do it. That's the only explanation. There can be no other explanation. And yes, I put my head on the line doing this on your show and anywhere else I'm asked to speak. The proof that bin Laden did not perpetrate 9/11 is that we issued a kill order and not a capture order.
You and I had this discussion before the last time that you were on the show. It was like, yeah, let's whack him before he talks. Exactly. I remember that.
It's absurd. It's absurd that we did that. And it's absurd that the American people have bought this as a technique of our nation state in its obligation to defend this country. It's absurd that we applauded the assassination of the one man that could have pointed this nation and our forces in the right direction of the nation state that perpetrated 9/11, because it was not Al-Qaeda. Al-Qaeda didn't even exist and doesn't exist the way we've been told it exists. I know because it was part of my job as a special assistant to Congressman Jack Metcalf. That was part of my special projects as a special assistant, was terrorism. So given that bin Laden absolutely did not perpetrate it, we kill him, and we're now funding two nations, Israel and Saudi Arabia, and we're fighting now 3 wars, one in Libya, and my guess is we'll move on from there. We're not through yet. Whichever country's in revolt or continues to revolt, like what's going on in Egypt, we will continue to deploy troops. And that is the most hideous aspect of 9/11. Of course it's a tragedy. Of course we should feel anger, but not fear. We should want to know who was behind it, because there's absolutely no possibility that bin Laden did it. So then we should go back to the Bob Graham's 9/11 Commission report, where he went public and said that the FBI collected all their documentation on nation-state involvement, classified it for 30 years, that we won't hear anything about it for what, 25 years now?
Oh, yeah, 50. Well, there'll be a lot of us gone by the time another 50 years goes by. Now, listen, I don't want to disturb your linear way of thinking, but I do want to alert our audience to the fact that this is not a scripted show. You and I and the millions are having a conversation here, so it's liable to ramble around a little bit. So before I forget, do you have a take on that Blackhawk crash, or was that just an unfortunate incident that doesn't look good?
No, I think it was shot down, and the Taliban publicly stated that they knew exactly what they were doing, that they had access to a new weapon, and that we would see its use more often. I don't think it was a coincidence that the same SEAL team that assassinated bin Laden were also on that aircraft. 31 members were on that aircraft. So, we're creating a dynamic on this planet right now where the United States is perpetrating some of the most heinous wars and backing some of the most vicious rebels, including the ones in Libya. Some of those people in Libya that are these so-called rebels, they were considered al-Qaeda by Muammar Gaddafi, and he was fighting them on our behalf. He was an ally to the United States in the war on terror. And suddenly, now we're backing the very people, just like the Northern Alliance is now being backed in Afghanistan by us, when in fact they were the enemy of the Mujahideen against the Soviets. We're switching sides like we're one of the warlords that switches sides at the drop of a hat.
Craig,
our
if he was
today, are our friends tomorrow.
I get you. Well, let me ask you this. Just clear me up on this, and I am not an expert on this. I don't even come anywhere close to it. I just ask questions, and some of them aren't very discreet. So in tonight's show, I don't know, a program rather. It's not a show. It's a program, right?
Right.
I don't know which will be less discreet, the question or the potential answer, but I feel like you and I are kindred spirits in this. You are out on the clothesline, and so am I in my own little way. So let me ask you this. What about the Lockerbie bombing, and what, if he was an ally before, did somebody turn him?
No, I think in the Arab world and North Africa and the Persian nation, these countries have always been Machiavellian, long before Machiavelli ever even wrote his treatise on Machiavellianism. Very often, bad people turn out to be an ally because they, in fact, are in power for so long. They, in fact, changed their mind. Saddam Hussein was our ally against Iran. We backed him against Iran. The Soviets backed Iran. So, you know, in the Arab world, let me just say that, to me, there's no such place as the Middle East. That's a term Western scholars have come up with to explain the way the world is in geography. But the countries that are built on the Muslim faith, whether it's Persian, Arab, North African, they have always been tribal in the sense, even when they become nation states, and their power structure is different. They have no interest in democracy. What we're doing cannot be described any longer, and I'm certainly no leftist. I'm not a progressive leftist, Pacific or radio type, but you can't deny that America is now acting as a colonial imperialist power. And I hate to have to think this and feel this in my own country. But I really do feel that it's at some point, 9/11, I knew it would be a turning point. As soon as it happened, I told everybody on the radio, I told everybody in my client base, everywhere I spoke, this is going to change everything. And it has. 10 years later, it has changed everything. This country is slipping into a full national security state. We will have no liberties left in the next generation. This country will not look like the United States at all in 20 years, maybe less. We're going to see a financial division in this country unheard of in world history. We've already given more money to the richest people in the world in bank bailouts, phony fraud loans, foreclosures, the money's coming back to the bankers. This country is being torn apart, and 9/11 is part of that thing that's tearing the country apart. It's also dividing us as a people, not just blacks against whites and Mexicans against Americans who don't like immigrants, and not just the poor against the rich, but far worse than that is what's taking place. We are really turning into a very hateful country. And those people that lived through Weimar Germany, and they saw what took place in Germany in 1933 throughout the war, they understood that part of what was wrong was their government, made up of their own people. Americans are very reluctant, except for a minority that listen to this program, Coast to Coast, and very few others. By and large, the American people refuse to look at their country and say the leadership does not represent the nation state any longer. That takes a great deal of courage to look at your country and say it is so fundamentally changed and it's become so heinous, and we're perpetrating wars and assassinations and murder on a global scale in violation of not just international law, but our own Constitution, our own legal system, and any concept of legal or moral justice. We no longer believe in a just war or anything like that. We now think it's right that a president can sit behind his desk and issue, quote, a kill order, day after day after day, authorize the murder of people all over the world, simply because we, our government, has decided that's the enemy.
We're going to get, go ahead. Well, I'll tell you what, hold your thought because we're going to have to take a break here in a minute, but I want to find out a couple other things. I want to get as much out of you as possible, so I'm going to let you do most of the talking. But I want to know when we come out of this break, on the other side of it, I would like to find out what your take is on that hole in the side of the Pentagon, because I don't see any aircraft debris, and a lot of other people, these thoughts of what it might have been linger. This is Coast to Coast AM, and we're talking with Craig Hulet, and we shall return. I think I hope that we are all on the same page here. I want to know about the hole in the Pentagon. I want to know if it was a jet or a missile. I want to know about Sharia law here and the spread of radical Islam in this country. I want to know it all. My mind isn't big enough to know it all. But maybe in our collective mind, there's room for all of it. But I want to track down the people who did this. Don't you? Back with Craig Hulet in just a moment. This is Coast to Coast AM. Stand by. Good morning or good evening, whichever it may be. Mr. Hulet, what put that hole in the side of the Pentagon, in your opinion? It's been dogging me for years, about 10.
Well, I think it was what we were told it was in this case. Sometimes, as Freud would say, sometimes a cigar is a cigar.
Right.
I wasn't present. I have spoken with no one present. I have spoken with people that were on site, ATF, on the Twin Towers, so I know what happened there was, in fact, what happened. So I have to come to the conclusion that it was, in fact, an airline, and it was done pretty much the way the other 4 incidents were done. And I think the problem we're having right now in this country of understanding this is, and including the last part of your question you posed before we went off the air about Islamism in some form coming to the United States. I don't think that's a threat. I think this country truly is threatened by our own government at this point in a way that I hoped I wouldn't see in my lifetime. But I've been doing this public work for over 30 years now, and something like 12,000 hours of radio and television. And I've seen a fundamental shift in the way the American people have succumbed and accepted what our government does and says in a way I find now astonishing. 20 years ago, this country was wide open to debate. I had no problem discussing what the government was doing, what it was lying about, coming through with news reports or declassified documents and exposing these different things. And I never had any problem convincing hosts or producers or the audiences that these things were in fact happening and that our government will lie to us on a regular basis. And the only way to stop that is by being vigilant as citizenry. You can't count on the media, the free press, to do it. They have no obligation to tell the truth. They're in it for the money. And when corporatism starts moving into a country, the way it has taken over this country as an ideology, corporatism then lends itself to nothing but lies and fabrication and manipulation and theft and the trillions of dollars flowing into the bankers' vaults while the American people are being taxed to death, indebted to death, and inflation will totally destroy the value of the dollar in the next 10 years. And yet the American people, the dullards that they seem to be, are fully prepared to accept whatever the government tells them. And let me just bring up 2 things that are very troubling to me tonight because they're not getting major press. We're backing the Libyan rebels right now that overthrew the Gaddafi regime. They are slaughtering black people, black Africans, black Libyans, anybody that has black skin. They are beheading them, lynching them, tying them up, shooting in the back of the head. And a former congressman just left Tripoli a week ago, Walter Fauntleroy, and he was on the ground, and he saw French and Danish special forces fighting with the rebels and beheading black people. A racial genocide is taking place, and the United States is backing it with NATO and ground forces. We're directly involved with it. And some of the people, it just turns out there's this long train of refugees, of black Africans fleeing Libya and starving on the beaches and running through the deserts, and they're headed back to Nigeria or Niger, and by coincidence, a country that our president claims his family lineage goes back to. And this is not getting covered, it's being ignored, and it can't be denied that it's taking place. And yet, I'm sitting here knowing from the work I do, the documents that come across my desk. I just read a declassified report that explains that over half of all the so-called terrorists or foreign fighters that we're fighting in Afghanistan and Iraq, and also in Libya, we are now backing them, over half of them are Saudis.
Why am I not surprised to hear this somehow?
And this is not being told to the American people. Saudi Arabia has been behind so much of this since 9/11, from the very beginning. And the greatest beneficiary of everything that's taking place on this so-called Arab Spring, the greatest beneficiary in the region, besides Israel, is Saudi Arabia. And yet nobody seems to have the sense to take a look at it and go, well, wait a minute, how come there's no uprising in Saudi Arabia or Kuwait? How come there's nothing going on in Abu Dhabi, Bahrain? But how come we're standing by and letting Syria slaughter Syrians at a rate of 16,000 a day? And why are we helping to slaughter Libyans at approximately the same rate?
I got to ask you this, Greg. Obviously, the Saudis and several other of the big dogs in these various countries where these atrocities go on continuously, obviously there's no problem sitting in the lap of luxury while they're surrounded by basically blood and guts. So it stands to reason that if there are elements within our own government, I mean, we were warned by Eisenhower, don't let this military-industrial complex start sleeping in the same bed with the government, because if you do, you got trouble, and we did let it happen. And so that has now happened, so I suppose it follows that the top dogs in this country, or wherever they are, but who have interests in this country, wouldn't mind sitting in the lap of luxury while there were blood and guts all over the United States as well. Now, is it that corporations become so strong? Because corporations are made up of people. There are other talk show hosts out there who will say, well, corporations make jobs. You know, you keep bashing the corporations. It's like, well, I think well, I don't know how many people know about Ludlow, Colorado, where those people back in the day got burned up because they were occupying some land that one of the big ones, the J.P. Morgan, or one of them, one of the big ones, Getty, I think it was Getty, had those people done away with. So is it that the corporations and the money thing has become so powerful and such an allure to these completely amoral people? Or does somebody have some sort of a gun to our head that we're really not going to let any information out about?
Well, let me put it this way.
I mean, is it greed, or are we being blackmailed? I guess that's what I'm saying. Is it greed, or are we being blackmailed? Sorry, go ahead.
Well, I think our government, to some degree, is already blackmailed. It's done. That's finished. We don't have a senator or a congressman, and I've been saying this for 35 years. We've got 535 liars, cowards, and scoundrels basically running the country. Well, who's in the White House is irrelevant. It's irrelevant who the president is. It doesn't make any difference because, and even Samuel P. Huntington, one of the elite's finest scholars, admits to this in several of his books. They don't want to change the two-party system. They want it exactly like it is. So we'll get sick of the Republicans, blame everything on the Republicans, and then put Democrats in that do exactly the same thing that the Republicans were doing. 8 years later, we're now sick of the Democrats, so we want a Republican. And nothing changes because a two-party system is a perfect system to manipulate a people with. A 3, a 4, or 5-party system is impossible to manipulate the people with. But a two-party system is perfect. It's even better than a dictatorship because the yoke rests lightly on the citizens, the subjects. We don't think we're being systematically enslaved because we still have the right to vote, even though it's a complete joke. And Obama is fulfilling all my expectations. I used to hear the first year he was in office, people were saying, he hasn't fulfilled our expectations. He has fulfilled perfectly my expectations. The day he was elected, I said, Karl Rove is applauding that this man is in the White House. Karl Rove could not be happier because he knows that in 8 years or less, he gets to put Jeb Bush back in the White House. I'm saying back because that'll be our third Bush.
Do you really think such a thing is, Craig, do you think such a thing is really possible?
Absolutely.
I mean, are we sucking on lead bars here and don't know it? Is it too much fluoride, chlorine, trans fats, or whatever? And we're just, I mean, look, Hitler came to power in what, 33? It was 39.
With less than 50% of the vote.
Yeah. And then in 39, what, September 1, he rolls into Poland. And everybody was warned. Everybody saw it building up, but they just let it roll anyway. But at least that deal, once we got into it, was over by 45. But this has been going on 10 years. So I guess my next question is, and I'm just going to give you the majority of the bandwidth here. Is it just too big, too screwed up, and too far down the road to stop it, or can this be stopped? And if so, how? Well,
I've grown accustomed to, and I don't want you to take offense to this. I certainly don't mean any offense.
Don't worry about it.
Very often when people ask me what the solution is to something that I'm presently discussing, it's usually because they want me to stop talking about the problem.
No, I want you to continue to talk about the problem.
I don't believe I'm in a position to offer solutions, and if I thought I could, I would be lying. I know I would be lying and I have no purpose in my life to do that. I have no reason to lie about anything at my age and having done this for this long. So, to be honest with you, I think the American people are growing more ignorant each year. I think as they become more obese, they become more stupid. I think the American people don't enlist in the military because they don't care to support their country, and they would rather have 50% of the new recruits that volunteer happen to be Hispanic and minorities from foreign lands. They're the ones fighting our wars for us, and we send them back into the combat zone 6, 8, 10 tours. So I think the American people have kind of, in their own way, made it clear to me they're not really very interested in being, quote, Americans any longer. Now, I grant you I'll discount coast-to-coast audience because I do know your audience is far different from most of the rest of the people in this country that I talk to. So I'm expressing what I know on a nationwide scale of my own countrymen that I've been speaking with for 30 years. And I'm telling you, they're growing more ignorant, more hateful, more bigoted, and to a degree, in some degree, the younger generation coming up are just flat stupid. And I think that's going to be in the end, that's going to be our true downfall. It will be the American people's fault that we've allowed corporatism to completely take over this nation at virtually the local level. Now you can still run a mayor and a county sheriff for office and get a pretty decent person. But by and large, at the state legislative, the governor's level, it's already being weeded out by the moneyed interest. You can't get elected to high office without enormous sums of corporate money. And this is corporate money that has no interest, by the way, in creating jobs in America. Anybody that still believes corporations are creating jobs in America is a stupid person, because that is flat untrue. The opposite is true. Half the jobs are being sent overseas by corporations that began their entity in the United States. We're being betrayed by corporatism. It's not just destroying the world and dominating the world through the use of military force. It is gutting the United States. There will be no jobs in the auto industry. Manufacturing will never come back. The timber industry is dead. And the American people are going to pay the price.
Speaking of the timber industry,
are to blame.
Speaking of the timber industry, how about that deal with Gibson? Now, the feds go in. Now, this is what worries me. You're talking about these corporations. So now are the corporations able to get the feds to come and visit the Gibson guitar people to tell them, well, your problems will go away if you just move your operation to Madagascar on account of this rare wood you're using?
Let me put it to you this way. When we talk about the multinational monopoly corporations, they are identical to the United States federal government and all the powers it has accumulated. It is the same thing. There was a book written back in 1945 by the head of the Antitrust Division, and he tried to tell the American people then that the taxation system and the corporate system were two sides of the same coin, that they were growing, and at some point they would become the coin of the realm, and they would be identical. Nobody listened to him then. But now we've got corporations and a federal government that acts in that corporate interest, and none of it is in the interest of the people of America. Now you ask, what kind of a solution? Well, let me be very clear. I'm not going to advocate this. I would never advocate violence. I'm not only anti-war, I'm anti-violence. You can't have gone through what I went through in my military life and then stand up and want to see war and violence. But I will tell you this. As much as I am against it, I no longer believe, at my age, I no longer believe that where we're headed can be stopped through the electoral process. I just don't believe it. I'm not advocating violence. I'm saying that violence may come, but I don't think it's going to come to this country in an American spring. We're not going to take back our government from the people who have taken it away from the American people. They will hit the streets and put Marines in the streets and kill Americans just as willingly as they'll shoot bin Laden in the back of the head. The men that control our country tonight have no interest in seeing that the American people live a great, wonderful, peaceful, fruitious, wonderful life. They're not interested.
You know what, Craig? I abhor violence and ugliness of any kind, despite the fact that it's all over our televisions, 500 channels or so, and nothing is on. Some nights nothing is on except that stuff. So we become desensitized to it, and yet somehow we're even more fearful of it being turned on us. It's almost like some sort of a genius psyops, a psychological operation to desensitize us to it happening to other people and making us ever more fearful of it happening to us. I wish we had more time, I really do. Give us a website where the people can find more about you and the things you look into.
It's CraigBHulet.com, Hulet.
Wish we had more time. It was great to have you on tonight. 10 years. Oh, absolutely. We'll do it again sometime. 10 years down the road, the questions remain. Yes, they do.